All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our budget work session. At this time, if you're able to rise, please do so for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Let us sit down. All right, so at this time, I will turn the meeting over to Superintendent Schwartz and Business Manager G. Quinto for our budget work session.
All righty. So I'm going to start tonight with my myth busting and respond to these things that I've been hearing. I want to talk a little bit about why people who are negotiating end up at impasse. People think of impasse, I would start by saying, as being a negative. I don't see impasse as a negative. Unfortunately, when you have two groups who are negotiating, if you get to a point where you can't move in terms of your negotiations, sometimes the best thing that can happen is that you get into two rooms with a mediator who goes between the two parties and works on helping them to come to a mutually agreeable decision or action. I see impasse as being a place that I wouldn't necessarily choose to be, but when we're at a point where we can't seem to come to any consensus agreements, sometimes impasse has to happen. And in the case of impasse here, it was a joint declaration of impasse. So both the team we were negotiating with and our team agreed mutually to go to impasse. I would certainly say Drew and I are always interested in continuing whatever discussions we can, where we can, with whom we can. But again, if we end up at impasse, which we have in other negotiations throughout the years, we're okay, because we have found it sometimes moves us forward. I would certainly say to folks who are negotiating, if you agreed to impasse but don't want to be there, I would talk to my labor relations specialist and ask them to talk to the district's attorney, because right now that paperwork has been jointly filed. I also want to talk a bit about this idea of closing a school building and what it saves and what it costs actually to close a school building. So when Drew provided you the information about what we would save if we were to close an elementary school, and we were using this round figure of 2.8 for the three, Lincoln, Glenwarden, and Glendale, and then more than that for SAC because of its size, what we meant was, or what I meant was, in order to recognize those savings, it comes from the staff in the building. And what I mean by that is, if you simply move all of the children from that building into the other three schools, and you move the staff along with them, you are not going to recognize any savings. Because as I mentioned last week, 78% of our budget is personnel. So it's salaries and benefits. So by closing a school, which we'll talk about a bit more tonight, moving the children, and then adjusting the staffing, that's where the savings come from. And we would agree it's probably not a full 2.8 million. First of all, we're not just going to shutter the building and walk away. The building's going to need heat and light and water, and it's going to need to be maintained. Even if we're going to sell it, even if we rent it to someone else, we will have commitments to keeping that building intact. If we make it a rental building for some odd reason, or if we were to try to sell it till the point at which we sell it, we have to take care of it. And we think that's about $50,000. I also want to point out that the cost of the athletic consultant is not $20,000. It's $2,000 times 4 months, so it's $8,000 is what the athletic consultant's helping us with. And is that what they're getting for doing meetings? No, they're working directly with Marcy and Emily in the athletics department to mentor Marcy, who's a brand new AD, and also acting AD, and also to work on our meetings and where we're heading to. But the correct cost for that individual is $8,000. And the cost of the athletic trainer, which I think was also misrepresented last week, is $61,800. That's for the amount. We get more than our money's worth. So our goals for this evening are to provide a brief review of last week's information, to answer any questions the board has, to take a deep dive into health insurance, to look at the savings and cost of closing a school building, and then I'm going to need some guidance from the board about where you think we're going in this budget process. And with that, I always start by reminding myself what our mission here is, that children are the core of our mission, and that's where I've got to keep my thinking as we proceed. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague.
So just a quick summary or rehash of where we started. Again, the carry forward budget is the economic impact of carrying all the programs forward from the current school year into the 25-26 fiscal school year, honoring all collective bargaining agreements, escalations that we anticipate, and any other known factors that we can incorporate into running the school district in the following year. By doing that, we show that we would have a budget gap of $2,853,000. And we only had an allowable revenue increase of slightly under $1.3 million, based on the tax levy going up slightly, about $1.1 million. I showed the state aid increase and why it was $630, because we're fully funded on the foundation aid. So we're getting 2% foundation aid, and some expense-driven aids drive it up to 2.54. The pilot revenue decrease, even though kind of misstated in the Gazette article this week, but it's been stated correctly. Page 17 of the February 10th PowerPoint showed that although 3 pilots are sunsetting, which affects your revenue or your tax levy, does give you room under the cap, moves about $21 million preliminary to the tax rolls, which will generate $581,000 of taxable income. So that's why you see the difference between the tax levy and the tax rate as we move forward. These are the expense drivers of what increased. Again, health insurance, which we've been taking an analytical look at this, where the self-insured drug is about a 30% increase. The medical is about 12.5%. It blends out to be about 17% budget to budget. Salary and wages is what we expected. Those are the agreements that we settled with. Special ed out of district tuition, the BOCES placements had 9 additional students. We budgeted for 4. So we had 13 new students, and it's a +9, and that's the 40% increase. I've shown graphs that show that budget line's gone up about 4 or 5% historically, so that's an outlier. The rest are pretty small impacts, but that's $4.1 million of budgetary increase, or 6.33%. This was the first pass through what we could do to reduce that gap, and that was gone over last meeting. This was some generalizations that have detail behind it, which we'll wait till the board gives formal approval to incorporate into a draft. But that was $1,940,000 last meeting that reduced the gap. And then this is what looks like when we incorporate the $1,940,000, we drop from 11.79 levy increase to slightly under 6, basically cut it in half, and the tax rate would go from 10% to 4.33. So now the new gap to the cap, if $1,940,000 and actually $1,905,000 in expense reductions, $35,000 additional revenue, would make the gap to the cap $912,522. And you can see the impact on a $160,000 home and a $200,000 home. Still significant impact to what they're already paying. These are, you want to go these are additional proposed revisions, meeting with administration over the last week or so. Again, you can see the reductions in FTE, not filling some leaves of absences. That would generate another $760,000. Would get our gap down to $152,000. So now the health insurance, the drill down. Scotia was one of the original founding 3 districts that founded Cashick way before I came here. But for the, right now there's 21 districts in Cashick, and they oversee about almost 16,000 contracts. And then also in addition to that, about 11,000 prescription contracts on the ESI formulary. $250 million is the premium that's overseen in Cashick. The 21 districts, you have Albany County, some big districts, Bethlehem, North Colony, South Colony, Guilderland. The RCG, 3 members left a few years ago, Averill Park, Troy, East Greenbush came over to Cashick. A Nyack, I think it was, out of Fulton, Montgomery counties came over to us. Amsterdam, Broad Albin, Perth, Voorheesville, and Fonda, Fultonville all came over. Scotia's contiguous. Some friends are in this, Shalamont, Mahonis, and Burr Hills right next to us. And then there's some other districts like Ravina, Green Island, Hudson Falls. I think I got most of them. But that's, start out with 3, and now there's 21. The question was asked last meeting, I believe, but every collective bargaining agreement identifies the plans, the co-pays, the retiree benefits, and everything else. So language is very strict, negotiated that way, so it protects the membership and the retirees. We've gotten in what we call model plan, which is gives uniform formularies, co-pays, and so forth for all our groups. They all went to that model plan. Everybody in Cashick's primarily on this model plan. It gives us better purchasing power with the carriers. Also reduced costs for both the members and the districts. We've had step therapy in for, and Sarah would say that, we negotiated that over half dozen years ago. CanRx is voluntary, but that's available. So that kind of gives you a grid of how things line up, but you can see there's synergy amongst all the groups, and they all identify the plans and everything else. So you just can't change things unilaterally because of things going on, and that's the way it should be. These are, we haven't adopted our rates, so we'll be doing that, I believe, Thursday when we have our meeting, but right now they look like these are the medical and drug. So Highmark, PPO and POS, the medical is about 12.5%. The Express Scripts is the carve-out drug, that's 30%. So that blends out to be about 16.7 for the Highmark subscribers. CDPHP, the medical, is about 10.95, and the drug, which is a drug-insured rider, is 2%. That blends out to about 8.5. We have younger lives in CDPHP. The older lives are in the Highmark programs. These are where the contracts lie within the district. There's 319 active contracts. There's more people being insured because of families and everything else, but this is basically where they all sit. You can see CDPHP is about 60% of the actives. think it's 59-41, I believe. 59% CDPHP, 41% is Highmark. But the actives like the EPO. And then the retirees, there's 379. Those are individual contracts, pretty much, although there are some people retire 55 to 64 that can carry their family into this. But we have, I believe, 290 people on Medicare age. And you can see that a lot of them are in the MAPS, which are Medicare Advantage, which are a voluntary offering. We don't have that in the contracts. But the retirees like it because it's less premium and better benefits because the government subsidizes it. They're very rich plans, and they have lower premium than the commercial WRAP. WRAP being the supplemental coverage you have after age 65 to cover whatever Medicare doesn't. So the retirees like them and continue to move to them. So you can see where our members lie out between every one of our collective bargaining groups. So those are the rate increases I've kind of hit on in the previous discussion. People ask, when you look at the budget going up 17%, you have to adjust the base from last year's budget because we got hit with a unforeseen 36% mid-year Medicare Advantage plan increase, where it's been flat for about 10 years. But you all remember when the Inflation Reduction Act came into play, there's some unforeseen consequences on health insurance with the regionalization of what you're paying to certain people in the Medicare or medical field, nurses and other helpers. CDPHP and Blue and Highmark caught up with this, and the government actually caught up with it, passed it down to the carriers who passed it down to us. So that was a big hit this year, and you got to build it back into the budget for this year. We also had a shortage on our ESI drug this year. I had to put money in. You got to build that back into the rates. But you can see that 294 of our 379 retirees are 65 and older, and 284 are in the self-insured drug. The other thing I have to account for in the budget is people that may opt in, who have opted out. We have over 100 people that don't take the insurance, but they can come in for circumstances that the carrier allows. Divorces, marriage, loss of a spouse or something, addition of a child. These are things that we have to let them in legally, and they don't exist right now. So you got to build something in there in case people come back into the plan. This is the elementary school that we showed a couple times on how the staff is laid out for each of the elementary schools, not including special ed. So that's okay.
So I had brought this to you last week, I believe, which is the roll-up of class sizes by grade level for the coming school year, 25-26, if we were to keep all 4 elementary schools open and running. So that gives you an idea of the number of sections we have, the number we could have, if we were to condense to 3 schools. It includes our kids with special needs who are in self-contained programs. Certainly not all our kids with special needs. I want to go back and talk about this a little bit. This is from our most recent enrollment study, which is called a cohort survival study, which Mr. Zontner did for us in 22-23. So what I've shown you is our 23-24 actual enrollments, and then what was projected as part of the cohort survival study. And you can see for both 23-24 and then again in 24-25, we're a tad under where Mr. Zontner predicted we would be based on the pure mathematics of it. And then I've given you what he had created for us out for 25-26 through 27-28. So I want to talk a bit about what it would look like if we were to close a school. And you notice I'm saying 26, 27 because I do believe we are going to need a transition year if that's the direction the board would choose to move in. And this is very raw data. What do I mean by that? Well, certainly one of the things I mean is that I don't have a way to truly and accurately predict who is going to be in kindergarten in 26, 27. So I picked 150. Now that's higher than we are right now as we await final enrollments. You might recall we were at about 138 for next year's incoming kindergartners. But I'm saying even knowing that and that those students would move to first grade in 26, 27. I'm still calling that enrollment about 150, so I've built in a little flexibility there. Second grade would be the current kindergartners who are going to be first graders next year, and then the roll-up is based on current enrollment till we get to that 25, 26 school year. So I've also given you the class size guidelines as they stand today, and then talked about what average class sizes would look like in 26, 27 based on this. I also don't have our kids with special needs in these figures. Now, if you're wondering why that would be, if you are a student with a disability, you would have at minimum an annual review every year. Annual reviews are where we talk about the continuation of program, which could be that you continue in the program you're in, or that you move to something more restrictive, or you move to something less restrictive. That's called the continuum of services. What our goal for special needs students is that they start at the place where they have, if you will, the most freedom. So you typically would not start in a self-contained classroom. You typically would start in general ed with supports to see if you could be successful. If you couldn't, you might go down the continuum to more restrictive classrooms. And by restrictive, I mean smaller numbers of children and probably more time with one teacher in that self-contained setting. However, we cannot predict, even with students who are here right now, who would then be third, fourth, and fifth graders in 26, 27. We can't predict if someone might have a disability that hasn't been identified yet, that gets identified in 26, 27. We can't account for children who are moving in and out of district, and we can't account for children who are in programs at present because we don't really know where they'll be in 26, 27. So I've taken the children with special needs that I know of today out of these numbers. Further things to consider if we were to close a school. As I've mentioned, I don't know what those numbers will be for students with special needs. The state average, Katie, is around 12%, I believe. We are somewhere near there or slightly higher. That's been pretty typical for us, but we can't predict who is going to need what in 26, 27 in terms of our students with special needs. Closing a school will clearly change our attendance boundaries, so we would need to adjust those for 3 schools, and that's going to impact transportation depending on which school is closed. And what will the district do with the building it closes? So again, I've mentioned to you it's probably about $50,000 to keep the lights on and the utilities working, to make sure the building's being checked. Certainly there are options, putting a building up for sale, which in the districts that have done that, Bill Hills comes to mind, Shelmont comes to mind. Selling off buildings is a process. We could perhaps repurpose it and rent it out, but what we could get for rent remains to be seen. We could perhaps offer it as program space to Capreach and BOCES, to other preschool or UPK programs. But the bottom line is we can't do any of those things for September if you were to say to me, close a building now. Then I also want to talk to you about what happens with staff when we close a building, because I think sometimes there's a little confusion about that. And these are the 4 things we're going to talk about. Certification, meaning what is your certification in education? The seniority list, which is our list of who's most senior, and it's based on your date of hire and your certification. Everybody who teaches is not on the same list because we all possess different certifications. When we talk about layoffs in education, and I think probably in most businesses, we talk about a reduction in force. So that's the process we use to determine who gets laid off. And then particular to education, we have something called the preferred eligibility list, which I wrote to the board about a couple weeks ago. And what a Pell list does, it's that list that's used to determine recall of laid off employees. Now, the first thing I want to tell you is when we talk about closing a school, and that it'd be around $2.8 million to close a school, that planning is based on the folks in that building. So everyone from the principal to the custodian. But what could very easily happen is that you close a building and nobody in that building is actually the person who's going to lose their position, be laid off, or end up on a reduction in force list. Because it's going to depend on your certification and your seniority. So I'm going to use myself as an example. I hold multiple certifications. I have one in general education, or what used to be called the Common Branch. So that's everything from nursery to kindergarten to 6th grade. I also have one of the oldie special education certifications that says I can teach anybody from nursery school through 12th grade, any child with any disability. That doesn't even exist at this point. They are specialty certifications for people. But let's just pretend it's me. And I'm teaching in special education. And we're going to lay people off. So I'm in this building. I'm a special ed teacher there. We're going to lay people off and close the building. We're going to divide the children up over the remaining 3 buildings. 2 of those buildings in 2 sections, that 3rd building, which is Sacandaga, in 3 sections. So everybody's going to fit in 7 sections. There could be a general education teacher, someone who's certified, in the other certification I hold, that birth, kindergarten, K through 6 cert, who has been in the building far longer than I have as a general education teacher, who potentially could be accessed. But chances are that person's going to, we call it bumping, bump someone in another building who has far less time on the seniority list. So even though Kim might be there teaching 4th grade, and we're going to eliminate 4th grade, my guess is if Kim's been there for 5, 8, 10 years, Kim's not going to lose her job because she's too senior. She's going to go bump somebody else in the district who's less senior. So when we talk about closing a building, we're not talking necessarily about that group of individuals, that principal, that nurse, that custodian, those teachers, that reading specialist, that special education teacher losing their jobs. What we're talking about is the least senior people district-wide sitting in those particular certifications. Does that make sense? So I had heard from one of my colleagues that when I talked last week, when I spoke and I said we could close a school, that someone said, oh gosh, they're going to close Lincoln, we'll all be out of a job. Well, even if we were to close Lincoln, we wouldn't all be out of a job because there are very senior people like Mr. Giannetti at Lincoln. And in my principles, seniority plays a role too. So if you have multiple administrators in the same titles, the same thing happens. All of this moving and regrouping and resettling, if you will, is truly driven by what you're certified in, how long you've been teaching that, and where you are on the seniority list. Okay? So I want to make clear that when we talk about closing a building, we're not necessarily talking about those people in that building being the persons who are affected. It's going to really depend on where you are on the district-wide seniority list in your certification area where you're currently earning time in service. Now, if you're wondering how many certifications are there, well, if you think about it, in a school building, we would have a principal, we would have secretaries, we would have general education teachers, we would have special ed teachers, we'd probably have a speech therapist, at least one reading teacher, we'd have a nurse, we'd have custodians. In every one of those instances, seniority and certification is going to drive who is placed on a reduction in force list. Once we work through all of that, those folks who are teachers are placed on what's called the preferred eligibility list, a Pell list. And they're on that Pell list for 7 years. And any time from the time they are laid off or RIFed to the end of that 7 years, if we have an opening in their certification area, we call them up and ask them if they'd like to come back. And if they choose to come back, they come back at the next step from the step they left us on. So there's no loss of benefit for them. But I do want to be clear about how that gets done. Closing a school doesn't really save us money. It's the personnel in the school that we would save money if we were to close. And as I demonstrated in my 26-7 slide, it will cause an increase in class sizes, still well within your classroom guidelines, but there will be an increase and space will be a little bit tighter, clearly, than it is now. So tonight, what Drew and I are hoping you can talk about for us is, based on our discussions last week, where I had people saying, but I don't want to lose the SRO, I don't want to lose this or that, I don't want any reductions in this area. We can stop at the 1.9 million, that first round, and go out over 3.25. Even with the reductions I've brought you tonight, we aren't under 3.25, and those reductions will affect currently employed people. We can keep making further reductions to get under 3.25. I think Mr. Quinto said about 153,000 to get there. So that will be some additional positions, and perhaps we can free up some other things. And when I say other things, I mean the traditional late buses, field trips, those kinds of things to close that gap. It would be the difference between one staff and two. Or if there is something else you'd like us to do. So that's where we look at our props, you know what you'll be asked to vote on as community residents. And I would ask the board to give us some idea where you're at. And of course, ask any questions.
For everybody, sit down here. All right, so Drew, I'll ask you your crystal ball that you have tonight instead of your magic wand. This past week after last week, the State House and Assembly met and put their proposals to the governor for their budgets. I think one was at 2.9, one was at 3 for foundation aid. I know we don't know this answer yet, but how may that affect us if in fact that could happen in the governor's budget?
So right now, they're looking hopefully for an April 1, which they didn't do last year. And they've talked about increasing the BOCES aid by allowing more of the salaries and benefits to be calculated in a COSER. Right now, it's been at $30,000 for like 50 years. So that would increase BOCES aid. I'm kind of hazy on what they're looking to do with the foundation aid because that was part of the Rockefeller Foundation study. But the Senate and Assembly, though not in agreement, have thrown more money in there. I just don't know how that would impact us. We don't have specific runs or anything like that yet.
What is, so we know on the page 24 there, if we stop at the 1.9 and to go out over the 325, is that 5.98? And then if we took the reductions tonight and we went out at the 153, give or take, that we're still away, do you know, is that 3.7 that I saw in there, or what's that number? You know, top of your head?
It's, we have on the next page, we have,
The page I was on was 24.
Page 11, I think, Drew.
was it page 11?
It's on 11? 3.7?
Yeah, 3.7 with a 2.09 tax increase.
All right. So it looks like the plan might be for next year, start of the school year, July 1, and have a reorg meeting to start the conversation in the beginning of the school year about, we all love committees, to have a committee about the potential closing, repurposing of the school.
Correct.
And then what that would potentially say. I guess on that question I would ask, and again, we don't need to know this now, but if we did go to 3 sections, I know some of the class sizes are a little bigger. You know, just speaking as an old guy here, both of my boys under Mr. Egan's direction were fine. They both had well over 22 and 23 in Glendale back in the old days. But could we just have an idea, and I know it wouldn't be an exact figure, of what staff reduction that could be and how much that would save us? Or is that something for next year as we get into more exact numbers to look at?
Well, I would certainly say, if you were to think of it in terms of, I would think it will probably result in, at least conservatively, 4 staff members, because we're not actually creating new sections, and we will have to do some section adjustment for next year as it is, but we're not creating new sections. So, but again, if we are looking at next year, we would also take into consideration retirements at the end of next year out of all of our units. What does that do? Who does that move? But I would think it could probably get us 4 teachers. And then it gets into questions like, would we access a nurse, which is how we would recognize the savings? Or would the board think that that nurse should go to a different school? perhaps the high school or the middle school where there's more students, in which case there won't be a savings. But that's why I'm saying I really think this has to be planned out in the coming year. I know folks have asked me about grade level centers. It'd be very hard to run grade level centers out of 4 buildings, or I'm sorry, 3 buildings. It'd be easier to do 2. And if you look at the cohort enrollment study, we might get there, sadly. But I don't see, for example, that we would be running 3 schools as grade level centers, unless we ran them as single grade level centers, like a K1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of thing. And at this point, it would certainly affect current working staff. We've tried very hard to stay away from folks who are currently working to the extent we can and are not are retiring or are not retirement eligible.
Okay.
But it's not as simple as saying 6 classes times 2 in a school, 12 classes, we can come down 12 teachers. We can't do that. I wouldn't see that happening.
On page 11 again, with the potential proposed revisions for the reductions on people, I know we don't get into that, but do you have an idea of where they might be?
Oh, yeah.
Secondary, elementary?
Yes. The teachers would be district-wide. And what might actually happen is something else that's on my mind for a reduction. That person could switch to a teaching position, so I'd get that reduction, but they'd still be employed just in a new spot. The teaching assistants are high school. The nurses out of district. You approved last budget meeting several leaves of absence. And again, we would go back to switching someone who's currently available to us potentially into a leave of absence rather than letting someone else go. So we're trying to work around that.
I'll look at my notes. I took a lot, but I do have a question because I've been asked a couple times since last week's questions about our athletic trainer. I was asked if we save our athletic trainer, who seems to be more visible and important, why do we have to pay for doctors as well then? If we have school doctors and athletic trainer, is the doctor a legal portion of what we have to follow?
Yes.
All right, that's what I thought, but I was asking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because remember, our school physicians do more than athletics.
Right.
Much more. In fact, I would say athletics is a smaller piece of what they do for us.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question. So on the SRO, you have it written down as $41,000, correct? Am I correct on that? Where does that figure come from? I know we have one that's on a grant. Is that half of a grant price, or will we reduce somebody to a 0.5 in time?
It's looking at the 2 in collaboration of where we might reduce the FTE of 1. So it's just to get 41,000 out of that budget line, not specific to a particular SRO at this point. So we're having discussions with both the village and the town. Am I correct, Susan?
Mm-hmm.
So
I just wasn't sure if it was like a half, so like somebody would go half-time or keep somebody.
something like that, yeah.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure I understand, you're still trying to keep both but reduce their time, is that what you're saying?
Potentially, yes.
Okay. And then one of the questions that has been asked was when we carry over positions, like we're talking about teachers and teacher assistants and stuff, the athletic director is a position that
we have to have, so we have to carry that over, even though we have an acting one right now, that still has to remain in our budget, correct?
It's just one, though.
Just one, okay.
That goes back to our, everything that's in the present budget was what we rolled forward to come to you with the first blush.
And then my other question was, looking forward, if we happen to shutter a school, we talked about having staff reductions, obviously there. The schools that we are gaining students, would we have some support staff there also coming over, or we would just?
Yes, again, it's going to depend. So for example, if we go to 3 buildings, we're still going to have self-contained classes for children with special needs. So there will probably be some support staff movement with those classes. There might also be an increase in needs for reading or speech language therapy. So if we needed to move a staff member there to cover those increased needs, we could do that. That's why I'm saying it's not as clean as you just shutter the building and everybody who's in that building is riffed. Doesn't work that way.
Thank you.
For me, the increase in insurance is so significant. I have questions based on that. Potentially what, if anything, we could do with that to help this situation. And Ms. Federico last week during her speech, and I also appreciate that you sent us the speech as well, had mentioned that the Administrative Association signed a memorandum of agreement with the district that addressed the rising costs of prescription drugs. And knowing that that's one of the issues that we're having here with our budget, that obviously piqued my interest. Could you explain what that memorandum of agreement is that she was referring to?
Sure. It moves a collective bargaining unit to a platform with Highmark called Free Market Program. It's a program that Highmark has in for all of its customers in New York and Pennsylvania, with the exception of Cashick, which is the outline where we are. So we've been working since July on trying to deal with this, what do you call it, escalation of the specialty drugs. And they introduced this platform. And so we worked on it with labor and came up with this memorandum of agreement that put out to each of the collective bargaining units, first to their labor relations management team, and identified basically the drugs that would now be pre-authorization that aren't currently, and also that we would grandfather in the GLP-1s under whoever's authorized now. There'd be no change. They wouldn't have to get authorization and so forth. So we did all that and invited them to meet with me to go over what we provided, which was a listing of the drugs that would be now pre-authorized, and also the memorandum of understanding itself. So Local 766, the secretarial unit, and the administrators have all signed it.
So 3 of our 6 have signed on to it.
3, is it 6 we have or 7? 6?
Yes.
Right.
If all are to sign, and it sounds to me based on what you said that there isn't a financial change by signing this MOA, am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. There is no change in co-pays or contribution to the member. And the other key aspect is that every specialty drug now gets bid through approved pharmacies that only deal in specialty drugs. So that's seamless to the member, but it locks in the price for like a year with that drug. And multiple years if they agree to a CPI index. So put some guardrails on in a road that has no guardrails right now. So they're talking about probably about a 10% rate differentiation by doing this.
Okay, so because math is not my strong suit at all, can you explain to me what that, say all of our associations agree to sign on to this, it sounds like we're halfway there. What could that 10% do with respect to this year, the budget as it goes into next year? And I know I'm not asking you for specific numbers because that's not fair, but just if you could generally explain, like, how could it help us here on the budget?
It could help us a couple $100,000. But I have to get everybody, and they don't have to do it. It's because it's out of the bargaining unit, and so we tried to do our best to outline lack of disruption and everything else. But I understand the process, and
So would the percentage change from 17 to 7% increase?
no,
Is that what
the
you're
drug
saying?
is. Remember, it's only on the high mark side. CDPHP already has this in place, and that's, as you saw there, it's 59% of our actives are in CDPHP, and a handful of our retirees. So no, it's not the whole universe. It's the carve out drug piece. So that's why it's not millions of dollars. It's not the solution to everything. So it's part of the process.
Okay. And I know there had been some discussion last week from the community about our administrators and changing things with them. But I was looking at this and on page, it had to do with the insurance, but, and I apologize, my pages are cut off a bit. But it showed the different collecting bargaining agreements and the time frames. It seemed to me we're in 13, thank you. It looks to me that we're in the middle of the contract for the administrative association. Am I correct on that? And it doesn't end until 27. So we still have almost 2.5 school years before that. So that, to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that affects what we can do, if anything, with respect to that, right?
Sure. Same thing with 766. They have 2 more years. So yeah, those agreements were negotiated and they're honored. And things have changed, but we didn't know all this stuff 2 years ago when we signed.
I totally agree. All right, and that includes a lot of our department chairs, correct? They're in that, and the others that aren't are in the teachers. Is that what I'm understanding?
Department chairs are in the teachers' contract, and then academic heads and directors are in the admin contract.
Okay.
Along with principals and APs.
Now, with the athletic trainer, and I admittedly am not sports minded, I'm not going to pretend I am, and I don't want our kids hurt. I want them to get all the help that they can need. But we do have school doctors, we do have school nurses. Is there some savings that could be had if we utilize our school doctors, we utilize our school nurses, rather than having a separate athletic trainer?
I don't want to speak for folks who support the trainer, but I think one of the differences is that the trainer is right here directly working with kids. And that's not going to happen with our school physician or our own nurses at present. That would be a change in their responsibilities under the contract. Okay. So that's what I see as probably one of the most important things about Mike, is that he's here.
Thank you. That's all I have right now. You're welcome.
Chad?
I had a question for Drew, and I can't recall, but at what point will we look at maybe the fund balance if we go out and we have this larger percent? Is that something that we could potentially dip into to bring things down? What would that look like?
So we're allowed to have 4% and unrestricted, which we do. So call that 2.6 million. We typically use 4 million, a little bit over 4 million to appropriate in lieu of raising taxes. We've done that for the past 15 years. So we have to regenerate the surplus to keep putting it back in. This year's projection is the surplus will be half of what it usually has because of the factors I identified up there. The special ed influx and the escalation of health insurance has eroded our surplus this year by half. So we can probably use what we typically use. We'll have half of that money in the bank for next year. So you can empty it out at any time. That's your donut gets bigger. With state aid being capped at 2%, and heading into probably a recession, I think we're using the 7% of between reserves and fund balance next year. If we get close, it's a decision you can make, knowing that that's what we have to make up next year. So.
What would you say would be safe this year? If we did do that, what would you think would be a prudent number?
I don't want to put it.
I don't want to put you on the spot if it's something you can get back to.
You get
us
close
on.
to what you want to go out with, and all know me from over the years, and I don't like to see people lose jobs because of fund balance or holding on to an extra dollar, So then you make the decision that we'll put more money in, knowing that we have to make it up the following year. That's all I caution you. That 152 you're looking at is getting close. If that's what you want to go out with, then we can, we'll look at everything again. Once I know where we're headed, I'll look at everything all over again. Does that help, Chad?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Drew. So I'm looking at proposed revisions, and it's exactly what we had last week. Susan, I'm looking at these proposed revisions on staff reductions, and I've said that the programming and the staffing is not negotiable with me, but I'm just curious why we're looking at a few staff reductions, but there's no proposed administrative reductions, only revisions. Was it restructuring? I'm just curious on that.
It's in the first 1.9 million, so I did not go back there for more.
Okay, so what are we looking at when it comes to the administrators as far as reductions or what these restructures
New
are?
assignments. Yes, there will be reductions, but I can't talk about those yet.
Okay, at what point will we talk about those?
Potentially after I speak with our attorneys tomorrow or Wednesday morning,
Okay.
so for the next round.
Okay. At what point are we going to get a more in-depth view of if we're approving staff reductions, what those positions? I know that it's going to come down to seniority and things like that, but I mean, if we have somebody teaching underwater basket weaving, then by all means, that's something that I would relent on. But if it's reading intervention or an essential service, it's not something that I would be willing. What point will we know that, or can we?
Once I'm clear about the direction we're going in. So if we're going to say the board decided this evening they thought they wanted to stop at 1.9 million cuts, I'll bring you what those specific cuts are next week. If you want to go to the additional cuts we added tonight, I'll bring those to you. And then if you want to get under the 325, whatever it takes us to get the 152.
Okay. And I know I had said, I would like to come in under. I think that's probably everyone's hope, but I'm realistic at this point that we're going to have to be higher than that. But looking historically, when we've gone to our community and asked, that they've responded and supported us on that. So I'm hoping that we'd have to do the same in that same event. I'm looking, what's the other question I had? Again, the more I get into this with the SRO reductions, I'm not favorable on that, especially in today's era that we're living in. It's just not something I'm comfortable with. And again, the Learning Leaps is on here, and that's something else. If we're going to be focusing, of course, on seniors that are going into graduation, early intervention is what we always harp on. So I really, that's something I'm not comfortable with. I don't know where everyone else is on that, but I've seen firsthand the good it's doing for those kids. So I couldn't be on board with that. And that's just me, but it's a little vague for me. So I understand we got to get a better idea of where we're going, but makes it really tough for me to give you the up and down on that. Are we communicating at staff at all? Because, this is a big thing we're talking about. I know you've alluded to it over the years that, hey, we're getting close. We're going to have to look at this. Are we communicating with staff of, hey, this is a big thing. This is your careers. This is a scary thing. Are we communicating? Are we trying to comfort and say, hey, not just comfort, but also be realistic of, hey, this is where we're going. This is where I think the board is going. Are we communicating with them? Because I have to think that if I'm sitting at home and I'm hearing this, I'm scared. are we communicating and making sure that we're reaching out and doing due diligence with them?
I think the building principals have done that in their meetings that they've set up to talk with staff.
Okay.
Certainly, I won't talk to staff, particular staff, till I'm sure we're going to embrace what I've brought to you. And by that I mean the 1.9, the 1.9 plus, the 1.9 plus plus. And I think I mentioned to folks last week that's something I prefer to do myself, is have those conversations. But am I talking to the board, or I'm sorry, am I talking to teachers day to day about where we are?
I was talking just general, like an email. Hey, we've cracked the case on this discussion. This is just kind of where we're at as a communication.
I want to say there was one when we started the process, and certainly Julia's summaries are up on the website. I would hope people would come see me if they have specific questions, but no, I'm not. I'm not trying to raise people's anxiety any higher than it is.
Okay. And my last thing, I know our building admins went to staff and got their feedback. At what point can we review that feedback? That would be really helpful, at least from my perspective.
I'd be happy to share it with you.
Please, thank you.
Yeah, what we've gotten today, because you know some principals are offering multiple meetings.
That's awesome. I'm glad they are.
Yeah.
Yep, that's all I got.
I really agree with Chad. I don't want to see the school resource officer reduced, and I don't want to lose learning leads. I think those are two very vital and for the climate of the school. I think we need the SROs for the kids with learning disabilities, that learning leaps. There was just so much praise about it the last couple years that we've had it, and how much of an increase it's helped the kids. And I hate to lose those two things. I'm at a point where I'm willing to talk about going out over the tax cap. I don't want to lose more staff. I don't want to lose more program. It's just a really tough position to be sitting here in. I don't know. I mean, if I'm the only one that's willing to go that route, then obviously the board doesn't go that route. But I really don't want to see us cut so much that we really hurt the kids. And that's where I feel like we're at this point.
So the question on learning leaps, I hate to assume, but I'll assume that you just didn't put this on here without chatting with your people about it. And
Mr. Arquette.
Right.
Is the coordinator of Learning Leaps, yes.
So is the feeling that it's good, but we've created other programs that why we could get rid of it, or is it just that we need to look at getting that budget number down? Okay. That's what I thought. Thanks.
Is there a happy medium? Meaning, okay, fine, we're at 30. Were we at 30 because that's what the grant was, so that's what we put there? But maybe since we don't have a grant, maybe we do 20 or something else, another number.
Well, I want to be sensitive to what you folks are saying this evening about the things that you feel very strongly about value-wise, Learning Leaps and the SRO in particular. I would also remind you, I don't bring you any of these things because I think they're bad. But if you take the Learning Leaps and the SRO, we just increased that 152 we're at back over 200,000. at some point, we have to
Basically,
it's going
I've
to
been
hurt.
I've been thinking of this all night. We've heard a ton from everybody, including ourselves, what we don't want to lose. Nobody has said anything about what we feel like maybe we could get rid of, and that's going to be a huge problem at this point. And I feel like we have not made any movement. I don't think any of us want any of these things to go. I don't want to see an SRR to go. I see their value. I understand learning leaves is a big thing, but we're literally not hearing anything about what can go, and I feel like we're in a stagnant, stymied spot at this point.
We're coming down to a tough spot where, through my perspective, looking at everything, we're looking to cut fat, and there's nothing. It's just meat and bone, and it's what can you point at this point? That's where I'd be interested to see the staff feedback. They're daily on ground from what their perspective is, just because we're seemingly stuck on it.
Well, I think if we go back to the slide from week 1 about negotiables and on, I think half the board said the SRO was negotiable.
And I still agree with that.
Right.
I mean, I don't like it. I love our SROs. But to me, for example, the 41, that to me makes it look like we're getting rid of the Scotia one, who actually has worked with us on money. And at this point, because our other one, who I love, got a well-deserved promotion, is not going to be our SRO. We're losing. To me, it looks like we're willing to lose the experienced one from a municipality who's given us money. To me, if we're gonna have to get rid of an SRO, it's the one who either is not giving us money, or hey, they start talking to us about what they can do to help us so we can keep the SROs. That's just my personal opinion, because the budget line for them is either 152 or 162. So 41 of that is not even half. I would love to keep both. I feel like that maybe some work needs to be done on their side to help us keep both. And I know you've been talking to them, and I appreciate that, and I don't know the specifics of that. But they know the tough spot we're in.
Yes, I think at this point, everyone knows the spot we're in.
And maybe we need to look at our other contracts, our medical, our attorneys, all of our contracts to see. Believe me, I was in insurance defense for a long time. When an insurance company came to me and said, we can't pay this anymore, not that I necessarily believe them because it's an insurance company, we didn't charge as much. And I feel like sometimes you got to go to these people that are our annual contracts and say, you see the predicament we're in, we'd still like to use you, but we're going to have to renegotiate numbers, and it's going to have to be less. And I know Drew works really hard on doing that. I don't know, something in advance to try to help with this budget. I'm getting very concerned that week after week we keep hearing, I don't want to get rid of that, I don't want to get rid of that, which I don't disagree with. I'm not saying I don't. I'm just saying something's got to give somewhere.
I don't disagree. And certainly in what we've brought you to date, what we've tried to do is address the reductions in ways that are less painful. So whether that be through attrition, which is retirements, through looking at the administrative reorganization, through slotting people who might be in jeopardy of losing their position, those people on the low end of the seniority list, into a position that's open, rather than hiring another person. We have been very mindful about all of those things. I look at our school physicians, I don't think they've changed their contract in 4, 5, 6, 10 years. Our attorney fees have gone up. I would be very concerned about reducing that line, given the number of foils and other things that we've dealt with this year.
I get what you're saying about reducing the lines. I'm thinking more along the lines of, with all of our contracts, maybe renegotiating the hourly set sum or the annual sum. And that would include the athletic trainer. We'd love to keep them, but we can't keep it at the same rate. Is there a renegotiation we can do there?
And I'm not trying to pick a fight, but I'm gonna say, and then what happens when we do that, but I come and I'm gonna eliminate field trips and I'm going to eliminate late buses because now I need to make that money up someplace else. Yeah. And I know you all know this. We don't have an unlimited budget here. No one does. We're trying to work within the budget and the board's initial direction, which was get to 3.25 or under. I'm going to say it again, when 78% of your budget is tied up in personnel and benefits, that doesn't leave a lot of room to go get 2.8 million.
So the way it sits now, it's 3.7% to keep the 152. By adding, that's why I was doing numbers here. So adding the 71,000 back in for our SRO, I'm just hypothetically, and learning leaves at 31. Rough math, Joe, I think that goes like 3.9, 3.89, 3.91, something like that. So I would suggest, or I would ask, as we head in, and I know we're getting down to crunch time here, to look at that and see what that number is. I knew week 2 to keep what we want as a board, regardless of what we said as non-negotiables and negotiables a few weeks ago. You'll have to go over the cap a little bit to see if we want to keep the things that are important. I heard a lot this past week that for a board that had a forum for the first time in generations about public safety, and now you're talking about cutting an SRO. That's not, it's not a really good look, which, as I said, I don't want to cut anything, as we all remember. So, I would like to see that. I would like to see what those numbers are. I mean, I know we got big during COVID because of the CARE Act money, and, the staff grew. Is it time to shrink it a little bit? Are we going to be okay shrinking that staff a little bit? Every business has had to do it right now. So, and I know the school isn't a business, but still we're 78% as people. So do we have to look at that? I'm fine with what we proposed tonight, honestly, but I would like to see that difference in what's a 3.9 cap look like? What does that get us? And I'm surprised to hear Pam say that about going out over that cap. So, I've heard for 7 years now that the community will back it if we tell them why we'll back it, and this is the reason why. We'll tell you that we'll back it as a board if we have a majority to go out over it, and this is what we want to keep for our kids and our staff. Just my 2 cents.
I mean, the reason I'm willing to go out over is because I really think this community wants us to keep all of our staff. I think this community wants us to keep all of our programs. I think our community is very happy with the athletic trainer and the SRO and the things that we're doing. And I don't want to go out at 10%, obviously. But if we go out at an extra percent or 1.5% over the cap, I feel that it's more important to keep all the stuff for the kids.
What I've got from the community too is if we're keeping these things in place and we get out there and we articulate it to them, that they're willing to support it. Like I said, we look historically, we've only had a couple big asks of them. So things like the SRO, I mean, that's as essential as having secure doors to me. I've done the job. It's more than just being a cop. It's multi-layer. We heard that at the forum. So I echo what you got, Pam. That's where I'm at too.
Historically, I've always said I would go out over the tax cap if it meant we could keep things. And I understand as a community, as an Alice community where we're sitting, how much people can afford. So I'm okay to go out over the tax cap within reason. Like we can't go out at 10% like Pam said, it's not gonna happen. But if we need to go out a little bit above the 3.25 that I said that I would stay at, I'm fine with that. I'd like to see, like Hal said, what the 3.9 would look like if we kept the SRO and the learning leaves, what that would look like.
Okay, so help me understand. Now I'm hearing folks say you'd be willing to go over the cap. with what we've brought you so far, you know, we would be at a levy increase of 3.7 and a tax rate increase of 2.9 if we stopped tonight. So far, so good?
Yep.
Then I think I hear you saying that you'd like to add a couple things back in, particularly the SRO and the learning leaps. So you'd like to see what that does to the tax
That looks
cap?
like, yeah.
Okay.
Are you in agreement, Kim, or?
I'm
Yeah, it's not
definitely
gonna
willing
be
to look at it. Again, will reiterate, I would love better if our municipalities could work with us on the SROs, because I would love to keep them. So I hope that they continue talking to you to see if they can help us with this situation, because I think they want us to keep them as much as we want to keep them.
Okay. So for next week, do you want to just focus on that, or do you want to see what it'll take us to get to 3.25?
I mean, I think it's fair to look at the scenarios.
I'm sorry,
I
Chad.
think it's fair to look at all the scenarios.
Yeah, I
We're
think so.
getting pretty close.
I would like to see what it's going to look like if we go to 3.25. What does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Can I also ask, I know Drew, you have your meeting on Thursday about the MOA situation, correct? I would also love to see if all signed on to that, if an agreement is made, what if anything could that do
Okay.
to the budget as well? If it could that help us too?
Good point.
Because that could alleviate all these other issues like the SRO, the learning leaps, and some of our staff issues. I would love to see those numbers as well.
Yeah, it's a good thought.
And I'm really concerned of what staff that would affect. I know we'd have to get deeper into this process, but that's really concerning to me.
Anything else? So we have our direction. Curveballs. All right. Thank you, everybody. All right, moving on. Anyone have any other business to talk about?
We were talking last week about the graduation operation. I forget the name of it off the top of my head. Is there any way that when we do our monthly reports for like PTA and everything, could we get a report from that too, just so we can see where that's going, where they're progressing? Is that possible? I think that would be really productive for us to hear, especially with our board goals, if we're in line with what's being done there.
I didn't hear the beginning that you had asked, sorry.
What'd you
Last
want?
week, we'd had the report,
Oh, the graduation?
yeah, the Operation Graduation.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And that they were checking progress November, January, March. I would love to hear where they're at on that.
Okay, thank you.
And if we can get this stuff as early as possible, that would be really great, because kind of scrambling when we get in here. So I'd really like to be able to digest things as early as possible. I know it's a lot of work putting this stuff together, but send it to me in the afternoon if that's whatever, as soon as we can get it, that would be great.
Dance was a success.
Yes, it really, I think it was. Peter, would you agree? Was the dance a success? We had over 200 kids come, which was amazing. And I think they had a good time, right? Great.
On the street, it was awesome.
Yay.
Good. You should come decorate the vehicle for it.
There was some really good people involved with it, and obviously music and lights also helps as well. But yeah, it was very exciting considering it was the first time, 10 years they had a dance outside of prom, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool.
So excited. And I heard that there's a call for Teen Town volunteers for April. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yep.
See that? So we need volunteers
There's a
for Teen
sign
Town.
up genius on social media for folks to hop on. I think they got it broken down pretty well as far as time commitment. So I think there's a time commitment for everybody on there. So, and tomorrow is Founders Day banquet. I think most of us will be there. That'd be great to see those folks honored. And then I think I heard lacrosse youth sign-ups are going on. I saw that circulating. So I think that's everything I know.
And our girls bowling team did amazing. That's awesome how great
And
they
cheer.
did. Yeah.
All right, anyone have any other business? All right, now I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
There's a second.
I'll second.
you. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstained? Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.